Hi guys, we're Oh So Curious, and with me today we have Roland as our special guest and Katrina, my fellow streamer. Today we're going to talk about Pope's Exorcist and horror movies and everything about it because the film is out and we actually have a lot more questions than we had before we watched the film. And it's not because Russell Crowe is in the priest outfit, which it's something to see. I'm sure you guys can agree with me, but it's actually a very interesting film. It gives us a lot of nods to Exorcist. And Katrina, you mentioned that, I remember, when we were prepping for this. You get the vibes of The Exorcist, am I right?
I mean, specifically the Exorcist scenes, obviously, how the little boy portrayed being possessed and everything, all of that stuff. I personally don't think they did the original Exorcist justice with how they did it, but I just, as I was watching it, I was like, yeah, they definitely took a lot from the original, so.
And Roland, what did you
Did
you get Exorcist?
I will say, whenever like the makeup on the kid whenever he is possessed does look very much like the Exorcist movie. Should probably tell the audience like this is not the Exorcist sequel. It was just kind of like a little homage thing. So the Pope's Exorcist is an actual role because I like looked into this like for like 5 seconds and it's like, oh yeah, no. This is an actual dude. He was exorcising. Apparently, like he wrote some books. He like performed like over 100,000 exorcisms in his life.
Is it good? Is the film good? What do we think?
The whole, I wasn't scared at all. And I was trying to hold it together. I'm like, just take it seriously. Just take it seriously. And it was probably like the second half of the movie. I just lost it. My friend and I just were laughing through the rest of the movie. I don't know. I also, what was killing me was that I thought that the priest assistant guy, the Spanish one, he just looked so much like Tobey Maguire in his Spider-Man emo phase.
Yeah.
And it was killing me the entire time.
Yeah.
He did. Roland, what about you? What did you, were you scared?
No. It was.
So it's a shit horror movie.
Well, it was a very like, it was a narrative. It was basically what it was. And like, you're following this very like, a protagonist that you do care about. And you're like, you know what? I like this guy. This guy's cool. And then you're in these horror situations and there's an interesting subplot with the Spanish Inquisition. I don't know if you want to talk about that, Max.
We can mention there were interesting tropes that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, there was definitely some really cool scenes.
But the rest, exploded in our faces, sort of thing, right?
Literally. What were some tropes that you liked, Mags? Like, what were some like cool scenes that you saw that you made you appreciate the movie?
I completely agree with Katrina. It was hard to not to laugh. I thought the movie had potential so many times. There were some things that they just could have gone 100% with it and just follow with it. It's almost like they were too afraid to get maybe too complex. They still really wanted to try to make it as mainstream as possible. But come on, if you attach Russell Crowe to the project, you're already kind of going mainstream, right?
And his little priest outfit with these like awesome glasses that he had no reason to be wearing. And then for some reason, and he's like on this little moped and he's just chilling. And there's like this super dark scene in his hat and he's a super dark scene. And then boom, he's just chilling on a moped, driving through the city. It's like, you didn't have to show that actually. You could have just like, boom, and then you're at the scary house. You didn't need this awesome little insert.
Would you recommend anyone to go and see this movie?
I mean, no. I will say that it might not be scary to us, but it might be scary to some people because that's the thing with horror movies, and especially when you're getting into subgenres, because technically this is a supernatural horror film. Like supernatural, that's something that doesn't necessarily scare me, but I know that some people avoid horror movies because there are supernatural horror films. That idea of being possessed is so scary to some people that you can't control your body. I think if they showcased more of the possession and like them actually taking control of the body, because every Exorcist movie I see, they're just in a bed. Like they get to move around a little bit, and then they're like one of the grandparents from Willy Wonka for like 3 days for some reason. Like they're stuck in the bed, and I don't know why.
Literally.
And then,
just chilling. Why are we so fascinated by horror movies? By specifically Exorcist movies? Is it because they're believable, or is it because it's so tied into Christianity and What is it? What's with
It's not.
exorcism?
It doesn't always necessarily have to be tied to Christianity, but there always are religious roots. That's where the supernatural name comes from. It's something that's otherworldly. So obviously, it has to be something
But
spiritual.
vampires don't work this well.
No, so that is a great question. That is a good point. Thank you for vampires are kind of this like folk mythology that comes into actual monsters, while demons and ghosts and stuff like that can be like tied to, I guess, I don't know if ghosts can be tied to religious texts, but I know demons can. So that's why there's that difference. It's one of those like aesthetic things, like where you know the difference, but it's hard to describe.
Well, and I think also because demonic stuff religiously is used more for punishment and fear mongering, as opposed to like you're not going to be told like, hey, if you like were mean to somebody, like Dracula's going to come get you or something.
Yeah, really. That guilt that comes into it too, like, oh, I could fall victim to this.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
is that why they work? So is that why we got another Exorcist movie, do you think?
I think it ties with religion, and more often than not than childhood. Childhood is a great place to find fears, and if you have these connections and you have this fear that was put into you as a child of hearing demons, of like you're gonna go to hell, it becomes very, very real. And then you have concepts that might not even be tied to your personal beliefs, like possession. And that's just a scary thought, to like not having full control of your body, which you previously did.
right.
So I think there will always be a place for supernatural movies.
It's quite fascinating how kids are also a very common trope of that, of those exorcism movies.
That is
because
yes.
of that. It's whenever you have a very scary movie, there is kids involved, and the other example of a film I can think of is Conjuring series, right? There's also this demonic.
It's like the taking of innocence, right?
Exactly.
That's the main focus.
Also tied with guilt.
Yeah. I mean, we already have our opinions about this movie. I personally felt like it didn't really do it for me, but like in general, what do you think usually makes or breaks a movie, like a horror movie specifically? And why is it so much harder to make a horror movie than any other genre? Like, why is it such a hit or miss? There's never just like you know.
That's a very loaded question, but I love that. I think that's a great question. So at first should say that horror is like any other genre, is escapism. And I think what attracts people to horror, and this is related, I promise, is that it's fantastical because it has all these elements that are like seemingly impossible, but it always has these roots which seemed very grounded and realistic and gritty. So you kind of have this mixture of it's fantastical, but it's grounded. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And with that, then there's this kind of formula that you have to find, is it too fantasy? Is it too campy? Is it too gory to a point of like you're not even doing anything for story, you're just doing it to gross us out? Horror has always and will always be, even though it's one of the oldest genres in filmmaking.
Is it actually?
Yeah.
Wow. I had no idea. I mean, I should have known that, but...
Yeah, so the first... this is a little side story. The first movie ever invented or filmed was... I can't remember, because it's just off the top of my head. This just came into conversation. It was like just kind of like a walk in a garden type thing. And it's of course it's very early, so it's very creepy and it's fine, and you're like, oh, this is no biggie, but it has like horror roots behind it because it kind of goes into this thriller type thing of real life events. But the second movie is I think the Devil's Castle, the Castle of something, and excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm not like a historian, but that was a horror movie, and it like even back then started with special effects where there's a bat and it turns into a human and all this stuff.
So it dates so way back.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But horror is one of those things where, because a lot of people don't see any value in it, even though it has an insane amount of value, not even as in like my point of view, just like in society, they just deem it trashy and cheap because there are so many horror movies that are defined by that. With, 10 great horror movies, there's like 500 really bad ones, just like any other genre. And they don't see the greatness of a movie like Godzilla, which talks about the symbolism of nuclear war and talking about real life events.
It's harder and harder for horror filmmakers to like extract the real value of scary or those political like contexts and stuff. It's really hard to find a decent good horror movie. I mean, everyone's heard of Get Out, and that's
Great
quite
movie.
controversial because it made to the Oscars. It won an Oscar even, right?
Yeah.
It's so weird that I feel like most people have a similar level of what's scary, and it's just there's so many horror movies that most people can agree are not scary. So it's weird that the audience kind of knows roughly what they want, and yet all these movies are just not giving it to us. It's just weird, you know?
Well, I think that's also partly with a budget thing. Again, I've said like they're one of the most cheapest things. If you look on statistics of every genre of movie making, the lowest budget is documentary, because you can make those dirt cheap. And the second lowest is horror by like a big margin. And,
That's
sometimes
why, sorry, it makes me think of the genius of Blair Witch Project that married the two, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it gives you have to become so creative with what you're doing, and you can do it easily with
And
no
you can
special
do it.
effects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like the budget answer, Roland, if I'm honest with you. It's like, is it
No,
really
fair.
budget?
Well, because there are so many, and I've said this before, there are so many horror movies that use that low budget to their advantage, because they could have had this really expensive shot that was meaningless, but they create something entirely scarier. Everybody knows the story of Jaws. Like Jaws, the shark was supposed to seem more than it was, but because it had malfunctions in the water, Steven Spielberg used it less. So you create this fear of not seeing what's attacking. You're just seeing the view.
Yeah. Also, to like that budget point, I want to also shout out to this short film called Lights Out. You can find it on YouTube. It's like a 2-minute, right? It's like a 2-minute horror. One of the scariest things I've ever seen as a short horror film. So
David
no
Sandberg,
budget. Yeah.
Director of Shazam.
Wow.
His YouTube handle is a Pony Smasher, I think. And he has some like really awesome videos. Like he shows how to make like a homemade dolly. He's a really cool dude.
Okay. All right.
Amazing. You mentioned those societal changes and the way like that the horror has a power to influence it. And do you think this has something to do with it? The fact that we have seen so many horror movies, we know what to expect, and we became so numb to gore.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like you said, we are getting numb to horror because not only the horror movies that we see, but of all we're available to via internet. We're seeing all these very like real disturbing things that are happening. So you kind of, and then you see a lot of fake things. So you have to be convinced a lot more. So there's more of a need for psychological horror films where it's this like slow burning. We need to be kind of like have a full attention to it, like a full thing. We can't just have like jump scare here, jump scare there, because I'm not naming any names, but James Wan ruined that for everybody with all the sequels of Conjuring and Insidious. I love the first of those movies, but you've ruined it.
Yeah.
You've destroyed it. You can't watch any supernatural movies without a jump scare.
It's like
Thanks a lot,
denser the denser they get in terms of story, the less scary they become.
Yeah.
It's the fear of the unknown, like brilliancy of Jaws, right? Not knowing what you're scared about, like not having all the answers,
Yeah.
I think maybe The Pope's Exorcist would have been a better movie if it actually hasn't explained everything to us.
Yes,
if it kept some
agreed.
things unknown.
There are some things like where you do need lore, and lore helps it a lot. Like stuff like John Wick. That's not a horror film, but screw it, it helps my argument. Where there's like hints of lore, and you're like, oh, this is world building. This is cool. You can't just say like, here's the world, here's all this context. Here's some like additional like plus historical lore that we can like put a twist on it. It's too much to put a bite on, especially when you're focusing when it's getting to not even a horror standpoint, it's getting to a more fantastical standpoint because it was turning very fantasy at the end.
I will also add, like, for me personally, I just don't feel like the stakes are as high when watching a horror movie when I know that probably everyone's gonna live usually. And I think the things that have scared me the most
Evil
are
Dead.
horror games.
Evil Dead. Not everyone dies.
I love
Not
Evil
everyone
Dead.
died.
I love
Yeah.
Evil Dead.
Oh,
yeah.
Can I just say at the very
Correct.
beginning, I think they do a quote from Gabriel Morth and says that he died like when he was like 91. So you know that he's going to survive this story.
Right.
They give
Well,
it away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like having played, I feel like I've ruined horror movies for myself as well, playing and also just watching people play horror games. I just think
Yeah.
the stakes are so much higher because you're the one trying to survive, and you know,
Yeah.
you're not necessarily going to live through everything that's happening. And with
very
films, it's
immersive.
just, with films, you're just kind of along for the ride and you're not really participating. You're just watching it all being played out and you're just kind of like, yeah, there's going to be a moral to the story and they're
I
going to be
dare
fine.
you to play Outlast.
Oh, yeah.
Dare you.
Alien
change-
Isolation, though. Alien
Oh.
Isolation.
Yeah.
That one.
Catriona, you do make a good point, and I just want to say that that's kind of another thing is that our expectations are really high now with horror movies because we're always looking for the next innovation. That you really have to the writers have to take care of their characters. Like you have to you can't just
Yeah.
have like the archetypes. You know, you have to
Yeah.
actually give some thought and meaning behind your characters so that we can care about them, so we can see a little bit of ourselves in them. And really hurts when we see them like die off, you know.
So based on all that, 3 things you guys would change about the Pope's Exorcist that would have worked.
Less beds, more, less bedridden
beds.
children. Less bedridden children. Less explosions. More, I just feel like more dedication to, if you want to show an exorcism, if you're telling a true story and you want to show how that goes down, I understand you want to cater to a general audience, a general Hollywood audience, but if you really want to tell that story, I don't know. It just, there was something that didn't feel genuine about how they were telling it, and it felt like it could have been taken as an insult. Like if that was my story, I was that kid, I'd be like, why is all this happening?
You
Why-
never know how much Vatican had to say as well. Roland, what
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah.
Somebody should have died.
Oh
No doubt.
yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
god, that's awful.
A pig died.
yeah.
Does that count? There was a
That is
death.
good. You know what? R.I.P. that pig.
Needs to have the thumbs.
Yeah. Crispy bacon. R.I.P.
Well,
Yeah.
What about you, Max?
we said that if anyone else would have played Father Gabriel, I don't think the movie would have worked at all. I think Russell
Yeah.
Crowe is carrying over the whole film, and that's the only good thing about the film. So if you're a fan of Russell Crowe, you should definitely watch it.
And emo Tobey Maguire.
Yeah.
Emo Tobey
Also,
Maguire.
if this movie came out 5 years ago, you know for a fact that they would just all speak English the entire time.
Exactly.
At least this one, they're speaking different languages that actually
Yeah.
make sense. So
It
I
was
thought that
well
was cool.
thought through. It was they were very careful, but in some things maybe too careful. And I think I mentioned earlier, immerse us in it, give us new. That's what A24 does. Shout out to A24. They keep surprising. They keep pushing the envelope. They keep giving us things that we haven't seen before. So I think more of that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No, definitely.
Anything else to add, my dear people?
Oh, I thought that was just for me specifically. Sadness.
Oh, you're my other dear.
Okay.
No, nothing on my end. I thought you were talking to Roland as well. I was like,
Yeah.
all right, I was waiting for him to answer.
I will say, don't let this mainstream thing turn you off from supernatural horror films. There's definitely a lot of really cool ones. You just have to do a little more investigating. There's some awesome ghost stories that you can look and find for yourself that will probably freak you out. So
Send me some
Katrina?
links.
Send me some.
Okay,
links.
fine.
Yeah.
All right, I'll send you some links.
Yeah, thank you guys for watching. Send us some links of, and send it to Katrina, links for good horror movies. If you have seen Pope's Exorcist, let us know your thoughts. Maybe you think the film was great. Maybe you completely support our opinion. Let us know what you think about horror as a whole. Katrina, thank you for being amazing as always. And Roland, like,
I didn't really do anything,
are...
but thanks.
No, of course you did. You helped it. And Roland, thank you so much for joining us. Like, it was an
Thanks for
honor
having
to
me.
Yeah, thank you.
have you as
Awesome.
our horror expert. Because
Yeah.
that,
Oh, wow.
like, I found out so much. Seriously,
Yeah.
so many questions been answered. And on that note,
Watch at Late Night with Roland Underground.
hey, and
That was cheesy and cheap, but I don't care. I'm doing it anyways. Plug.
that's brilliant. We'll link it down below. Catch you guys later. Thank you for watching. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.